What if a creature from legend looked at you, as if it owed you its life? Deep in the misty forests of Mount Adams, a veteran ranger named Sloan Marlowe stares into the eyes of a terrified young Bigfoot and sees something hauntingly familiar. The truth? Not all monsters come to hurt us. Some return because we once saved them. Inspired by a real report buried in the Ranger archives, one that no one believed for 15 years. Now, Sloan must face a blazing wildfire, a choice between duty and instinct, and a scarred, towering Bigfoot named Calder who remembers everything she forgot. This is not just a rescue, it's a second chance, a bond beyond words, and a twist that will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Because Sloan once saved him, and now he's come back to return the favor. If you think Bigfoot is just a myth, don't watch this. Unless you're ready to believe in something you never dared to. I remember the wind first. Not the trees, not the rusted pipe, just the wind. It moved like something half alive, like it knew what we were about to find before we ever did. Sharp, high through the broken limbs above, low and whispering through the pine needles at our feet. It was the kind of wind that makes you turn around even when you know nothing's there. But that morning, something was. We were deep into the brush, beyond the old access road. Way past the collapsed radio tower that nobody bothered to clean up after the fires back in E08. Tommy had been joking most of the hike, trying to cut through the silence with his usual rookie optimism, as he called it. He was all flannel, caffeine breath, and trying to act braver than he was. I didn't mind it, really. Some of us need noise to feel safe. The report said hikers heard something weird near the old refinery ruins. A sound like metal grinding, mixed with what one woman swore was a child crying. She was shaking when she said it. Said the noise had a thickness to it. I didn't know what that meant until I heard it myself. It came low, like a breath stuck in a throat, but deeper. Older, not human, but not far. We stopped moving. The wind paused too, like it was listening with us. I held up my hand to Tommy and he froze. We were surrounded by oak and pine and undergrowth thick enough to snag your ankles if you weren't careful. But just up ahead, tucked into a mess of bramble and charred roots, was a line in the mud, like something had been dragged. No tire tracks, no boot prints. Just one long, smeared line, deep in the earth, headed downhill. Next to it, little dark dots, blood, still wet. We followed the trail slowly. I stepped first. Tommy behind. The smell was the next thing. Rust, rot, and something else. Animal, but not fresh kill, not decay either, just fear. The brush opened up into a shallow ravine, and there, half buried under deadfall and rusted tin, was the old pipe. 6 feet long, maybe more. Corroded edges. Looked like it had been dumped here decades ago. I scanned it once, then twice. Then I saw the eyes. They were locked onto mine. Wide, not blinking. Too big for the face. Buried in a mess of brown and gray fur, streaked with filth and blood. Limbs jammed at unnatural angles. One leg twisted into the jagged rim of the pipe, wedged tight between rust and bone. Its breathing was ragged. Each inhale shuddered like it didn't know if it wanted to survive the next one. It made a sound when I stepped forward. A sharp, stuttering hiss, like a cub that didn't know how to growl, like something trying to sound bigger than it was. I dropped to my knee. My hand went up slowly, not to touch, just to show. Palms open, voice steady. Hey now, you're all right. We're not here to hurt you. Tommy didn't speak. He just stood behind me. Frozen. I could feel his panic without even looking. He'd seen what I saw, those fingers. Not paws, not hooves. 5 digits, wrapped tight into a fist, shaking hard as it tried to push back against the steel. Then he turned to run the radio. He wanted backup, protocol. I let him go. That's when I noticed the other tracks. Not next to the pipe, not scattered, just surrounding it. One, clean. Pressed deep into the moss like a memory that hadn't faded yet. longer than my thigh, wider than both my boots together, human-shaped but stretched, twisted by weight, by time, by something that never should have walked upright. They circled the pipe, and then vanished into the tree line. I didn't move. Couldn't. The thing in the pipe, this baby, this child, whatever it wasn't alone out here. It never had been. Something had followed it. Or maybe it left the prints itself. I didn't want to believe that, but the shape, the size, it wasn't right. It was all wrong. And still, those eyes. There was something in them that wasn't beast. Panic, yes, but layered beneath that, recognition. Like it saw something familiar in me. Like it remembered something it shouldn't. And I remembered too. A flash, buried deep, came back like a jolt. A night long ago, younger me, lost near Ridge Hollow after sundown. My flashlight had died. The trail was gone. And just as I'd started crying, a sound came from the trees. Something stepped close but never touched me. I'd turned and seen a shadow, massive and still, watching from the trees. Its eyes looked just like these. They held me there, not with fear, but with warning. Not get away, but stay quiet. Stay safe. Back then, I told myself it was a dream. A story I'd made up to explain why I stopped crying and somehow walked out safe before midnight. I never told anyone. Not once. Not even my dad. And he was the one who trained me to hike blindfolded through this forest. But here I was, kneeling again. Same eyes, same silence, and the same weight pressing on my chest, like I was standing too close to something the earth itself was trying to keep secret. I whispered again, softer this time. It's okay, you're safe. It didn't believe me. Not yet, but it didn't fight either. I could see its chest rising and falling slower now. Less erratic. Maybe it understood the tone, or maybe it was just too weak to resist. Blood still trickled from the wound. Not gushing, seeping. The kind of injury that doesn't kill fast, but kills if ignored. Tommy's voice crackled through the radio behind me. "We got a saw coming, ETA 10 minutes. I didn't answer. I just kept staring, kept breathing, kept wondering what kind of wild, twisted fate had dragged me back here, to this pipe, to this face, to these eyes that felt like mirrors. The wind rose again. Not hard, not loud, just steady, like breath, like warning. And behind it, far off and low through the trees, something moved. Tommy was fumbling with the gear, cables clinking, metal tools scraping against each other, as I stayed kneeling beside the pipe, my hands still open, still shaking, though I did my best not to show it. The thing in there, the child, wasn't fighting me anymore, but it wasn't trusting me either. It just watched. Every slow breath it took seemed borrowed. Every twitch of its hand, its foot, felt like a scream it couldn't voice. I kept my flashlight low, angling the beam so it didn't hit its eyes, bathing the inside of that pipe in soft amber, like a makeshift sunrise. My voice stayed low too, steady. I wasn't even saying words anymore, just sounds that meant, "I'm here, you're okay. I won't hurt you." Its fingers had started to loosen. That was the first change. No longer clenched tight to its chest, but splayed, twitching. 5 digits, not claws. Skin under the grime and blood. Knuckles cracked and raw. I could see the pattern of its fur more clearly now. Thick in places, thinner around the arms and chest. Like it had been growing into itself, but got interrupted. There was a pale streak just below its left shoulder, almost like a birthmark, or an old scar. Its legs were twisted in a way no human child could survive. The ankle was deep in the metal. The fur matted down into a pulp where rust met skin. I knew we didn't have much time. The forest held its breath. I glanced up once, just once, scanning the slope beyond the ravine, the thin tree line that framed the ridgeline above us. Nothing moved, but then I felt it before I saw it. The air changed. A pressure, not a noise, not a vibration. Just the kind of heaviness that rolls over you when someone steps into the room and You don't need to turn around to know. And there it was, across the ravine, above us, standing still, too still, between two tall pines, framed by broken stone and the yellow bruises of fading light, was a figure, huge, towering, covered in a dark, tangled coat that hung off its shoulders like an animal grown too big for its own hide. I couldn't see its face, just the outline, the sheer width of it, like a bear standing upright, but longer, leaner, shoulders hunched slightly, like it had ducked under branches too many times and forgot how to stand straight. But the most terrifying part, it didn't move. It didn't flinch, didn't shift. It just watched, eyes glowing faintly. Amber. Not red, not white. They shimmered like fire caught in a jar of honey, and they were locked on me. I blinked once. It was gone. No rustle, no sound, just gone. Like it had been a trick of the light. But I knew better. That silence wasn't natural. The forest always talks, always whispers. But now, the woods were holding something back, holding their tongue. I didn't say anything to Tommy. I just looked at him, then back at the tree line, then down at the child in the pipe. My hands were shaking now, and I knew the thing inside could feel it. "You saw something," Tommy finally said. His voice was too calm. That kind of calm that comes when someone is starting to realize they're standing in something far deeper than they thought. I didn't answer right away. Just kept my eyes on the treetops. He took a slow step toward me. "You knew, didn't you? You knew what this was." I turned to him and said only, "Get the cutter ready." He hesitated, then nodded. He pulled the portable saw from the pack and connected the battery in silence. No more nervous chatter. No dumb jokes. Just quiet understanding now. Whatever innocence he had when we hiked out here, it stayed somewhere back on that trail. The child whimpered when the motor whined to life. I bent close, whispering again. My hands gently rested near the twisted edge of the pipe. I told it we were going to get it out. I told it it'd be free soon. I told it. I remembered. And I think maybe it did too. I saw something shift in its eyes then. Just a flicker, but something that looked like trust, or maybe surrender. Maybe those two things aren't all that different when you're small and stuck in a world too big and cruel to understand. I took a breath and braced as Tommy brought the blade to the steel. The grind started slow, sparks flaring against the damp underbrush, the smell of burnt rust and metal thick in my nose. Every sound echoed. Every vibration trembled through the pipe into the child's leg. It groaned. Not in pain, not like before. This was deeper, more raw. Not a scream, something older, like grief. The saw kept whining, biting through inch by inch. And then, a sound came from the trees, low, echoing. Not a roar, not human, something between a howl and a wail, but shaped by a throat that had known silence for too long. The kind of sound that doesn't ask. It demands. I felt it in my bones before I understood it. My hand stopped moving. The blade lifted off the metal. Tommy froze, eyes wide. The forest answered back, branches cracking, underbrush shifting. No rhythm, no animal logic, just chaos. But not wild, directed. Like a windstorm with intent. I turned, and out of the brush came something massive. It wasn't the figure I'd seen earlier. This one was shorter, broader, fur tangled and thick with mud. Shoulders like boulders, hands almost dragging at its sides, eyes locked on the pipe. And inside it, her child whimpered again. She didn't roar, she didn't charge. She just kept walking, straight, sure. But then she stopped, because something else stepped out from the shadows beside her. Taller, thinner, older. Its fur wasn't matted, but grayed and streaked with time, and across its chest, a long, deep scar. Raised and pink and brutal. I felt my heart hit the floor. The first one. The one from the ridge. He stepped between us, not to threaten, just present, holding the moment like a wall, unspoken, immovable. The child cried again, a weak, rasping cry. Tommy reached for his rifle. I slapped his arm down hard. We didn't breathe. 5 seconds, 10. The saw stayed silent. I knelt again. The older one didn't move. Neither did she. We were all caught in the same breathless second. And then, without a word, without a gesture, the older one stepped back. The mother took one more step forward. The cutter screamed back to life, and I went to work. The blade screamed as it cut into rusted steel. Sparks jumped like fireflies trying to flee. The child inside that pipe winced but didn't cry out. It gripped the rim with both hands, claws curling over rust like it knew this was the moment its life would change or end. My jaw clenched so hard it ached. I was steady, but barely. I had one hand on the pipe to keep it still, the other guiding the cutter slow, deliberate, inching through the metal like I was peeling the lid off something ancient that should have stayed buried. Tommy stood close, watching, but his fingers hovered just inches from the rifle strapped to his chest. He wasn't saying a word anymore. The wind had picked up again, colder now, biting. It whistled through the treetops above us and carried something with it. A vibration, low and ragged, like a voice pulled from the throat of the earth. Not a warning. A wail. It started far off, somewhere down the canyon. But it rolled up the trees, louder with every second, folding over itself like a wave of grief tearing loose. I stopped the blade. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. Every instinct in me locked up. That sound wasn't human. But it wasn't animal either. It was something in between, something torn. The child inside the pipe whimpered, curled into itself, face pressing against the metal. That sound, it knew it. That was a mother's voice, and she was coming. The trees began to shift. Not one branch, not one bush, all of it, moving like the forest had lungs and just took a sharp inhale. Tommy backed up a step. The cutter hung in my hand, heavy as a cinder block. My breath caught in my throat. I scanned the ridgeline again. Then I heard it. Closer this time. Leaves thrashing. Pine needles tearing free in clumps. Branches snapping not from weight, but from force. Something big was moving, but not just big. Purposeful. And whatever it wasn't alone. The sound wasn't chaotic. It had rhythm. Like a storm with a destination. And the destination was us. I dropped the saw, crouched low, hand out to the child again. My mouth moved, but I don't know if any sound came out. Just breath. Just the word, easy, repeating like a spell. The air was thick now, sticky with pine sap and electricity, like a thunderstorm pressed tight against the back of your neck. The underbrush ahead of us split, and she stepped through. Massive, covered in wet fur, matted with dirt and brambles. Her shoulders hunched like stone slabs, her mouth pulled into something close to a snarl, but sharper, like sorrow trying to be rage and failing. Her eyes burned, not just with light, with recognition. Her child was here, broken, hurt, and we were standing over it. She took one step forward. Tommy gripped his rifle. No, I hissed, loud enough to snap him out of it. But before she could move again, something else emerged. From the left, slow, calculated, not crashing, not stomping, just arriving. The forest went still. He was taller than her, but thinner. Not frail, just stretched, like age had pulled every line of his frame tighter. His chest was marked by a scar that ran diagonally across the sternum. Angry and raised, puckered like an old burn that had never healed right. It caught the light, just barely, as he came into view. He didn't look at the child. He looked at me, right into me, like he knew something about me I hadn't told anyone in years. He didn't snarl, didn't growl. He just stood, breathing, calm, as if the entire forest now moved to his rhythm. She saw him and stopped. That rage, all teeth and pain, cooled like water dumped on coal. Her eyes flicked from him, to the pipe, to me, and she waited. waited for his signal. My fingers trembled as I picked the cutter back up. He watched. I leaned close to the pipe again, blade teeth screaming once more. The metal gave under the pressure, a dull groan tearing through it as flakes flew off like snow. The child inside flinched. I kept whispering. I don't even know what. Just sound. Anything to keep it from panicking. Another inch. Another. I could see the edge of the wound now. Raw, flesh torn where the pipe had bit deep. The fur around it was soaked, and blood ran down my glove. Tommy stepped closer, just a foot behind me. His shadow hovered over my shoulder. Then the trees behind us split again, but this time the sound was different. Less crashing, more deliberate. And then he stepped out. Not the tall one, not the mother. Someone else, or something. Thicker, scarred, older. He had a limp. One leg dragged just slightly. But he was bigger than the other two. Broader. His face was shadowed, but I saw the outline of a jaw that looked carved from stone. And in his hand, a long, gnarled branch. Not used as a weapon, just held. The mother stepped back. The tall one didn't move. Now it was the three of them, watching, waiting, judging. A triangle of silence closed in around us. I could feel the heartbeat in my skull. My hands were slick. The cutter slipped once and bit into the rim too fast. The child screamed, a sharp, high, guttural yelp that punched straight through me. I pulled the blade away. Silence. Not even wind. Then the tall one took a single step forward. My lungs stopped working. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't challenging. He acknowledged, not with a roar. With a nod, slow, just once. I finished the cut. The edge peeled open. I reached in with both hands, careful to avoid the wound. The child was trembling, but didn't resist. It let me guide its leg free, inch by inch, blood smearing the rusted rim. As I pulled it into my arms, it whimpered. A small, pitiful sound that cracked whatever wall I had left. The mother surged forward, but not to strike. She knelt and gathered her child like it was glass, wrapped both arms around it, and buried her face in its fur. She didn't look at us. Didn't need to. The old one turned then, the one with the branch. And as he stepped away, his foot dragged through the mud. When I looked down, I saw what he left behind. A shape, drawn in blood and earth. A human hand reaching toward an animal's foot. And for the first time in years, I felt something crawl up my spine that I couldn't name. It wasn't fear. It was the feeling that we were being allowed to leave, and that next time, maybe we wouldn't. The saw blade slowed to a stop, a faint whine echoing as it wound down. My ears rang in the silence that followed, but it wasn't from the noise. It was the tension, that kind that climbs up your neck and sinks its claws into the base of your skull. I was holding my breath again and didn't realize until the child's weight shifted against me. Its leg, finally free from the pipe, slipped out into the light like something reborn. It let out a strangled, rasping sound and collapsed halfway into my lap, too weak to lift its head, its chest fluttering like a bird caught in a storm. The mother stepped forward. But what stopped me cold wasn't her. It was the way she looked. Not at me. Not even at her own child. Her eyes were locked on the older one. The tall one. Calder. The one with the scar and the stillness of a mountain waiting out the weather. She didn't growl. Didn't move with panic or rage. She waited. For him. And he didn't move either. Not at first. He stood there as if the whole forest had been holding its breath, waiting for some unspoken command to pass between them. His gaze flicked once, from her to me, then to the child. Then settled again. I swear to God, he looked at that little body like it mattered. Not like property. Not like prey. Like legacy. Then his chin dipped just a hair. A motion so small I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching every detail like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. She moved the second he did. 2 long strides, and she was on her knees in the dirt. Not lunging, not tearing, just gathering, arms wide, cautious, like she thought her own touch might hurt him. The child made a sound then, soft and low. The kind of sound you don't mean to make, it just leaks out when you're too tired to hide pain. She pulled him close, cradled him to her chest, and for the first time since all this started, I saw her face change. There was something in it I hadn't expected. Not just grief or fury, not even relief. It was gratitude, raw, unspoken, but there, etched into every line around her wide, haunted eyes. She bent low over the child, touched her brow to his, rocking gently just once. Then she looked back at me. Not long, just a second, but I felt it, like a passing current, brushing my ribs. Then Calder moved. He didn't say a word. Of course he didn't, but his body shifted with such intent that it was impossible not to follow it. He turned from them slowly, as if giving us all time to catch up. His massive frame was silent against the forest floor, not even a twig cracking. He walked 10, maybe 15 feet back toward the trees, paused, then leaned down. When he stood again, there was something on his palm, mud, wet and black from the base of a rotting log. He crouched, pressed his hand into the earth, dragged 2 fingers across it, then stepped away. I blinked, and there it was, etched in mud and pine needles. A shape, simple, a human hand, and below it, a creature's foot. Not perfect, not even artistic, just a gesture, but unmistakable. Tommy stepped up beside me, his mouth barely moved. "Is that what I think it is?" I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure what I thought anymore. The boy in the pipe, the scarred elder, the silent gesture in the dirt. None of it fit. None of it should fit. And yet it did. Like puzzle pieces from different boxes somehow snapping together. I felt my knees go weak, not from fear, not from the exhaustion that had set in long ago, but from the weight of understanding pressing down at once. She stood then, the child still limp against her chest. His arms barely clung to her neck. She didn't look back at me again. She didn't need to. Calder was already fading into the trees, not rushing, not disappearing, just becoming part of the woods again, and then they were gone. One moment, we were in a clearing surrounded by beings I'd spent my entire life doubting even existed. The next, just wind, just trees, just the faint sound of water dripping somewhere down the slope, and the buzz of insects slowly daring to return. Tommy let out a breath he must have been holding for 10 minutes. "Jesus Christ," he said, but it came out quiet, reverent, like a prayer or a curse he didn't know how to finish. I crouched in the spot where Calder had drawn in the mud. The image was already starting to dry, the lines blurring around the edges, but I could still see it. A human hand, an animal foot, together, not locked in combat, just touching. It wasn't some cryptic symbol, not to me. It was acknowledgment, that we'd seen each other, that we'd chosen not to destroy each other. And maybe that wasn't the first time. The breeze picked up again. Light filtered through the trees in fractured gold. Dust and pollen floated through the air like ash. For a moment, I thought I heard something just beyond the ridgeline. A low rumble. Not a threat, more like a heartbeat. The forest was breathing again. I stood, legs stiff, hands still shaking. Tommy was staring at the trees like they might crack open and speak. "They're not monsters," I said. He looked at me. "Then what are they?" I didn't know. Not really. But I knew one thing for sure. We hadn't saved that child. We'd been allowed to help. And somewhere deep in this forest, that meant something. I wasn't sure what yet, but it would come back. They always do. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear. Not entirely. It was something else. That hum in my bones, that ache behind the eyes when the world gives you a truth too big to process in one breath. I sat in the far corner of the ranger station, lights dimmed, old space heater clinking beside me, and dug through the file cabinet like I was chasing a ghost. Papers from old cases, wildlife tags, trail camera logs. I knew what I was looking for. I just didn't want to believe I already knew where it was. Bottom drawer, blue folder, no label. Dust clung to it like memory. My hands paused before I opened it. It had been years since I'd touched this file. Not because I forgot, but because I wanted to. I buried it back when I was still green, still hopeful, before the forest taught me that not everything wants to be understood. I cracked it open and found the photo first. Faded, warped at the edges, the kind of picture you don't show anyone. Taken on a cheap disposable, the film grain thick as snow. But the subject was clear enough. A small creature, crouched low beside a fallen log. Fur thick around the neck, dark with a splash of white like frost on the collarbone. Eyes huge, reflecting light like wet marbles. It looked half curious, half terrified. It looked like the one from the pipe, except younger, smaller. But that streak of white, same spot, same curve, it wasn't a coincidence. I leaned back against the wall, breathing slow. That day came rushing in all at once, the way it does when a certain smell or sound yanks a memory out of the dark like it never left. It was late fall, 2009. I just transferred into the Hollow Ridge district. I was still proving myself. Took every overtime patrol I could. One morning, I stumbled on a steel jaw trap. Illegal, nasty thing, tucked near the creek bed under a veil of moss. And there it was. Caught. A small shape, bloody foot, fur matted with dirt, but not a coyote, not a bear cub, not anything I'd seen before. I'd crouched close, ready to put it down, thinking it was suffering too much to save. But it looked at me. And that look, God, I still remember how human it felt. Not in the shape, not in the biology, in the sorrow. It didn't fight when I freed it. Just stared, wide-eyed, holding its weight on one foot, then limped into the woods like it trusted I wouldn't follow. And I didn't. I never reported it. Not in the logs, not to the district lead, not even in the field journal. I told myself it was because I had no proof. But truth was, I was scared they'd say I'd snapped, that I was making things up to fill the silence the forest leaves behind when you stay in it too long. But now, sitting there with this old photo in one hand and that child's blood still crusted under my nails, I knew. I knew what I'd seen that day, and I knew who he'd become. Calder, the elder with the scar. The way he'd looked at me, the way he hadn't attacked, hadn't warned me away. He remembered. 15 years. And somehow, through distance and wilderness and fire and fear, he'd known that I wasn't a threat, that I'd helped, and now his child was the one hurt. Trapped. And he'd let me return the debt. I sifted deeper into the folder. Notes from that week. My scrawl, tight, rushed, trying to write down just enough to stay sane. I'd drawn the symbol back then too, that same crude shape, the hand, the paw. I thought I'd made it up, like a dream. Something my brain latched onto to make the memory feel less impossible. But he'd drawn it too, in the dirt, just yesterday. It wasn't a dream. I looked up and around the room. The walls, the gear, the stale coffee smell. None of it felt real anymore. Like I was sitting in someone else's life. I stood and went to the gear closet. Pulled out the old topo maps, the ones we kept for search and rescue ops when GPS failed. Laid them across the table. Red ink marked old fire lines. Yellow was for campsites. But there, off in the far corner, near an unmarked tributary east of Talon Ridge, I'd made a note back in 2009. Unusual clearing. Animal signs don't match known local species. Avoid until surveyed. I'd written that. I stared at it now like it was a confession. I grabbed a flashlight, tucked the photo into my jacket, and headed for the door. Tommy wasn't on shift. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. I just had to see. The drive was short. Less than an hour down cracked forest roads, then another 2 miles on foot. The trail barely existed anymore, just a ghost path through dead leaves and black moss. The sky was low, full of gray light, but the trees swallowed most of it. Everything was damp, quiet. I found the clearing. It hadn't changed much. Same shallow dip in the earth. Same ring of rocks half swallowed by undergrowth. But something felt different. At the center was a tree. Old pine, wide trunk, charred on one side like it had survived lightning, and on the stone next to it, something new, carved. Crude but deep, fresh. The same mark, human hand, animal foot, and below it, something else. A shape I didn't recognize at first. Then it clicked. 2 circles, interlocked. Parent and child. This wasn't just a message. It was a record, a memory. Their kind doesn't write stories, doesn't paint murals. But this was history. Their history, their bloodline. And somehow, I'd become part of it. I knelt there, my hand hovering above the stone, heart thudding against ribs like a drum. Not fear. Not anymore. Just awe. Just wait. The sound of wind crept through the trees again, brushing past my ear like a voice I couldn't make out. I looked up, but nothing stirred. Still, I felt it. The eyes. Watching. Not close, not threatening. Just there. I stood, stepped back, and whispered one word. Thank you. And in that silence, that breath between forest sounds, I could swear something answered. Not a word, just presence, like a promise unfinished. And I left the way I came, quiet, careful, carrying more than I arrived with. But I didn't feel alone. Not anymore. Not ever again. It started with smoke. Not the thick kind that hits your lungs and makes your eyes sting, but a faint thread, curling lazy above the trees when it shouldn't have been there. I saw it from the ranger tower just after dawn, thin and gray, too far off the grid to be anyone's campfire, too early in the season for prescribed burns. The air was still and dry, the kind of morning that made the forest brittle. One match, one ember, and the whole ridge could go up like bone-dry paper. I radioed dispatch, but I already knew they were stretched thin. Wildfire crews had been diverted east all week, and besides, nobody wanted to believe trouble could start in Hollow Ridge this early in the season. But I'd lived here long enough to know. Things didn't follow the rules out here. People, fires, or otherwise. I threw on my gear and headed out alone. The trail was soft at first, damp underfoot from the melt, shaded by tall spruce and tangled fir. But that didn't last. 2 miles in, the brush thinned, the soil cracked, and I started seeing char patterns I hadn't seen in years. Black rings on tree bases, strips of bark scorched upward, fresh. Not remnants, not leftovers from the '08 burn. This was new, and someone had been here. I found boot prints not even half an hour old, crisscrossing through the undergrowth like drunks had stumbled off course. I followed the trail up a slope where the trees broke into a plateau. That's when I saw the source. A camp. 6 fire rings scattered across the clearing. Beer cans, instant noodle wrappers, a busted speaker, and something worse. Ashes. Still warm. Wind had carried embers west, downhill, and the underbrush caught. The blaze was already crawling, low, orange fingers chewing through pine straw and brittle branches. A slow-moving thing, but you could feel it breathing, like it knew it had space to grow. I pulled out my radio, called it in, gave the coordinates, and was told what I already expected. Evacuate if you can. Crews won't get there before nightfall. I stared at the slope. I knew what lay downwind. I knew the way the fire would curl. There wasn't time. Not if they were still there. I broke into a run. The map in my head snapped into place. The valley, the old flood path, the bend in the rocks where I'd found the symbol carved just days before. That soft trail behind the charred pine, the one someone, or something, had cleared by hand. It led deeper than any ranger maps bothered to go. And that's where I went. Smoke thickened. The wind kicked up dry leaves that slapped against my legs. I tied my jacket around my mouth, ducked low, and moved fast. I passed a downed tree with fresh gouges in the bark, 3 deep claws that had scraped not in anger, but like someone had fallen and caught themselves. Just beyond it, another sign. Blood. Not much, but fresh, darker than sap, dotting the path like someone had limped ahead. I stopped, looked around, listened, crackling above, but not just fire. A rhythmic creak, like something heavy dragging something heavier. I followed the sound until I hit the rock shelf. That narrow slot canyon we always joked about on patrol. How if you fell in, nobody'd find you for days. Now it felt like the only place anyone had ever wanted to hide. And there he was, Calder, collapsed against the stone, one leg twisted awkward, shoulder pressed to the wall like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. His fur was slicked dark with sweat, streaked with ash and soot. The branch he used as a crutch had splintered. His head was bowed, but his chest still rose. Slow. Measured. Alive. But barely. I dropped to my knees before I could think. He didn't flinch when I touched him. Just breathed. I saw it then. What he'd stepped in. A snare. Wire stretched between two stones, hidden by dirt and pine debris. Old trap. Probably left by the same assholes who set up camp. His ankle had caught. The steel had torn through fur and skin and deeper. Blood pooled, thick and sticky. It was almost identical to the trap I found the child in. History repeating itself. I pulled out my knife and cut through the cable. It resisted, bit back. My fingers slipped, sliced open, but I didn't stop. When the metal finally gave, I grabbed his shoulder, tried to hoist him up, but he was too heavy, too far gone. And then, a hand, small, covered in fur, trembling but strong, grabbing mine. The child, he was there. He'd followed me. I don't know how long he'd been trailing. But he looked different now. Not healed, but steady. Eyes focused. Like he'd learned something since the last time I saw him limp through the forest. He tugged once. Hard. And I moved. We worked in rhythm. Me lifting Calder's upper body. The child dragging what he could from below. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't fast. But inch by inch, we pulled him free of the trap, down the slope, back into the thinning light as the fire rumbled behind us. At some point, I stopped feeling the heat, stopped hearing the radio squawk from my belt. It was just the three of us, pushing forward through smoke and falling ash. Step by step, collapse, then move again. The child never let go of my sleeve. Even when I stumbled, even when my legs shook, his grip stayed steady. He led us through a side path I didn't know existed, a tunnel of stone and brush that cut under the canyon lip, where the air cooled slightly and the smoke began to thin. I could hear water now, trickling stream, running fast from the melt. And I knew, if we could get Calder there, just get him to that stream, we might have a chance. We reached the bank just before night fell. Calder groaned, rolled half into the water, his breathing ragged but no longer shallow. I collapsed beside him, head on moss, chest heaving. The child stood between us silent, and when I looked up at him, when I saw his face, not just wild, not just strange, I saw recognition. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just was, and I knew in that moment we'd crossed some line together. Not species, not blood. Something older than both, and far more sacred. The sky above turned a bruised blue. Smoke still curled behind the ridge, orange fading to black. But out here in this hollow, by this stream, we were alive, and that was enough. For now. The fire was behind us now, but the heat lingered. Even as we made it to the stream, even with cold water soaking through my jeans and up Calder's fur, it clung to me, thick in the back of my throat, hot behind my eyes. The kind of heat that feels less like temperature and more like memory. I couldn't tell how long we'd been dragging him, minutes, hours. It all blurred together under the weight of ash and adrenaline. My limbs had stopped aching. Everything had gone numb, except the sound of that fire still echoing inside my skull, that deep thunder roll of timber breaking and air-feeding flame. We were safe, technically. But safe didn't mean whole. Not out here. Calder lay on his side, half in the stream, chest rising slow and shallow, face half buried in the moss. His breath wheezed like something cracked inside him, but it hadn't stopped. That counted. The child crouched beside him, arms wrapped tight around his midsection, not moving, barely blinking. He didn't make a sound, and neither did I. The woods around us were silent too, not peaceful silent. The other kind. The kind that comes when everything knows something just passed through that wasn't supposed to survive. I sat down, leaned back against a rock, and let the weight settle into my bones. My shoulders screamed every time I moved. Smoke had scraped my lungs raw. I tasted blood and grit in every breath. I didn't care. I was alive. Calder was alive. The kid had found us. I kept telling myself that meant something, that it wasn't random, that none of this was. Then I heard it, faint, a sound in the canyon behind us, threaded into the hiss of steam and the occasional pop of distant fire. Not an animal, not the wind. A cry, small, wounded, familiar. I froze. The kid's head snapped toward the noise before I could speak. He looked back at me, eyes wide, then narrowed. Then he stood, just like that, like instinct flipped a switch in him, and he bolted, fast, not reckless, focused. I staggered to my feet and followed. My legs didn't want to cooperate, but the adrenaline found me again. I crashed through brush, scraped past rock, ducked low under branches. The sound came again, higher this time, closer, still weak, still broken. Then I saw it, a fissure in the canyon wall. Narrow, hidden, the kind of gap you wouldn't notice unless you were right on top of it. He disappeared through it without slowing, and I forced my way in after. Inside, it was dim. The air smelled wet, moss, stone, and something else I couldn't name. The space opened up unexpectedly into a hollow, small, circular, roots hanging from above like the ribs of something buried. The kid was already crouched beside a shape. Another one, smaller, wounded. Its fur was matted, leg twisted under at a wrong angle, eyes half closed, but breathing. Barely. Another child. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't about Calder anymore. This one had been left behind. No, not left. Hidden. Stashed in this cave, probably carried here by Calder himself before he went back for the other. Or maybe it had followed and collapsed. I didn't know. But the boy who'd led me here, he wasn't just a son. He was a brother. I dropped to my knees beside them both. Checked the pulse. Weak, thready, but there. I could feel the tremble of breath under the skin. The injured one opened its eyes for a second and something in my chest caved. That look. Same fear. Same quiet plea. Help. I whispered it out loud. Not sure if I was saying it or answering it. The older kid touched my hand. No panic, no hesitation, just contact, skin to skin. His fingers were warm, rough, human in all the ways that mattered. We carried the little one out together. I held the shoulders. He took the legs. We moved in silence. There was no room for words anymore. Back by the stream, Calder hadn't moved, but his eyes were open now, cloudy but watching. The moment he saw us, saw the child in my arms, he tried to lift himself, but his body failed him. The sound he made was soft and low, broken around the edges. Still, the kid heard it. He answered in his own way, by placing the injured sibling beside Calder, tucking them in against his side. Then he looked at me. There was no smile, no thank you, but he didn't need to speak. I'd never been more sure of anything than I was in that moment. He had brought me here because he trusted me to do what his kind could not. He had remembered. The sun began to drop behind the ridge, dragging a dull orange haze across the smoke-stained sky. Shadows stretched long across the creek bed. The world dimmed to gray and rust. I sat down again, legs folded under me, heart thudding like it wanted to outrun the stillness. The kids curled in tight against Calder's chest. His arms, somehow, found the strength to fold over them. And then he moved. Not much, just one arm. He reached toward me. Slow, shaky. His hand, massive and rough, came down on my shoulder and rested there, not forceful, not desperate, just steady. The weight of it was like the forest itself had chosen to touch me, and my throat burned. I didn't cry. Not then. not with them watching. But something came loose in me. Something I'd held too long. Guilt, grief. Whatever that thing is that piles up when the world tells you to forget and your heart refuses. We stayed like that until the stars came out. Until the last embers on the ridge faded into silence. Until the sound of insects returned. Tentative and searching. And even then, none of us moved. Because some moments aren't meant to be broken. Some moments are the bridge between what we were and what we'll have to become. They never filed charges. Never said it to my face, but I knew what they thought. That I'd gone too far into the fire line. Disobeyed direct orders. Put myself and others at risk. They dressed it up nice, called it an extended leave for mental evaluation. But I knew the look in their eyes. Like they weren't sure what they were looking at anymore. Like something about me had changed. And maybe it had. I left the uniform folded on my bunk the same day I packed up the truck. Didn't take much. Just the essentials. Maps, stove, 2 duffel bags of gear, and the folder I'd kept locked at the bottom of my drawer since 2009. The photo inside was still bent at the edges, soft with time. The eyes in that picture didn't look so foreign now. They looked like someone I'd known once, or maybe always. I didn't go far. A few miles west of the ridge, tucked just inside the state line, there's a clearing no one marks on maps. No trail signs, no digital footprint. Nothing to tell the weekend hikers or the rangers fresh out of college that anything was ever there. Just trees that lean a little differently. Moss that grows too thick. A silence that feels intentional. That's where I built the cabin. Single-room frame. No running water. Wood stove, hand-pumped sink, and a cot that groans like an old man every time I roll over. The roof leaks when it rains hard, and the generator only works when it wants to. But it's mine. And more than that, it's enough. Most days, the only sounds are birds in the morning and wind dragging through the trees after dusk. There's peace in that. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that settles after you stop trying to prove you're sane to people who never saw what you did. I keep to myself. Once a month, I hike down to town, grab supplies, pretend I'm just another ex-ranger who got tired of politics. No one asks much anymore. Folks out here have their own ghosts. They recognize the ones walking around inside me. But every now and then, something happens that reminds me I'm not alone out here. Like last week, there'd been no wind. No clouds, just that deep kind of blue in the sky you only get in October, where everything feels sharper and older. I just finished chopping wood when I saw it, a figure at the tree line. Not moving, not trying to hide. Smaller than Calder, lighter build. Stood there like it was waiting, watching. I didn't call out, didn't step forward. I just stood still and watched back. It didn't wave, didn't flinch. After a moment, it turned and walked back into the trees. But that was enough. Later that night, I took the small lantern and walked out behind the cabin, past the stacked logs and the old stone fire pit, to the wide, flat rock that juts out toward the creek. The one that looks like it's always been there, waiting for someone to mark it. And I carved. Slow, careful, same shape as before. Human hand, animal foot. Nothing fancy, just lines and intention. A reminder. A record, a promise. When I stepped back, something shifted behind me. Light pressure in the air. I turned. Nothing but trees. But the space between them felt different. Full, somehow. Like breath held just past comfort. Then I saw him, at the edge of the trees. Not close, not trying to be. Just there. The child. Taller now. Shoulders broader, still with that streak of white at the throat. He didn't move. Didn't need to. His eyes met mine, and something passed between us that had no name. Behind him, a larger shape stepped forward. The mother. She placed one hand on his shoulder. He looked up at her, then back at me, and they turned. Slipped back into the trees without sound, without a single footprint left in the soft dirt. Like they were never there. But I knew they had been, and I knew why. I stood there a long time, watching the empty space they'd left behind. Then I turned, stepped back into the cabin, and lit the lamp by the window. The flame flickered against the glass, casting a soft orange circle into the dark. I sat in the quiet. No TV, no radio, just that small glow. And under my breath, just loud enough to carry in the space between my chest and the walls, I whispered, "You remembered? That's enough." And in the stillness that followed, I swear the forest exhaled. Sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't the ones told the loudest. They're the ones whispered through the trees, etched in footprints that disappear by morning, passed between souls who may never speak the same language, but somehow still understand each other. Out in the quiet, beyond the reach of cell towers and searchlights, there are moments that don't fit into the categories we've made for the world. Moments that ask us to feel, not explain. Because not everything that's real has a name, and not every truth needs to be proven to matter. What we choose to protect, what we choose to see, to believe in, even when no one else does, that says more about us than any title or uniform ever will. There are connections out there that defy logic, bonds that stretch across silence, across difference, across fear. Not because they're magical, but because they're deeply human. Because compassion is older than science. Because respect doesn't require understanding, only humility. This story wasn't about monsters. It never was. It's about what happens when someone chooses empathy over fear. When the line between us and them begins to blur. When we learn that survival is not just about strength, but about grace. The grace to trust, to remember, to forgive. In a world that so often teaches us to guard ourselves, to be suspicious of what we don't recognize, it's worth remembering that the unknown isn't always a threat. Sometimes it's a mirror. Sometimes it's a gift. And sometimes, if we're lucky, it's a chance to become more than we were before. And maybe that's all any of us are really looking for, a sign that we're not alone. That kindness echoes, even in the wildest corners of the world. That's something we did, no matter how small, mattered to someone, somewhere. Thank you for walking this path with me. If this story moved you, if it stirred something quiet inside you, I'd love to hear what it meant to you. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, or just let it sit with you a while. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories that go deeper, reach further, and remind us what it means to be human, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. There's always another trail waiting, and you never know what's watching from just beyond the trees.